Hello everybody, this is Ian. We're excited to have you all here. Our third edition of our webinar series for The One Thing. At this point we're going to start. You have some important information on your screen. If you want to follow Jay at Jay Papasan on Twitter, or our guest presenter, Charles Poliquin at Strength Sensei. Also, please follow us on Twitter at The One Thing Book if you want to get more news about The One Thing on forthcoming webinars. And also, we encourage you to share your webinar tweets using the hashtag The One Thing. If you want to learn more about The One Thing, you can also visit our site at www.theonething.com. Last thing is everybody is muted except the presenters throughout the webinar, but we encourage you to please use the questions pane on the GoToWebinar tool to ask your questions, because at the end of the webinar there'll be a Q&A section with both presenters. At this point, I'm going to pass it on to Jay to continue. Go ahead, Jay.
All right. Well, I'm super excited to be on this call and get a chance to interview a really important figure in the world of strength training. Just if you're not familiar with Charles Poliquin, he's a native of Ottawa, Canada. While he was completing his graduate studies in exercise physiology in Canada, he began coaching athletes, a career move that has resulted literally in hundreds of medals, wins, and personal bests for the athletes he works with. He is known worldwide for producing faster athletes, and when a country wants a gold medal, they come to Charles. He is recognized, as one of the foremost strength training coaches, and he's coached Olympic medalists in 12 different sports, including the U.S. female track and field team back in 2000 Olympics. So really super excited to have him on this call. As you'll see once we start the interview, I'll have his website, strengthsensei.com, on the screen where you can find out more about him. Before I start the Q&A with Charles, many of the folks who are on this call may or may not be familiar with our book and how this connection happened. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes to hear the big idea, and then turn it over to Charles. Charles, are you there? Can you
Yes, I am.
Fantastic.
Thank you for inviting me.
Super excited to have you, sir.
Thank you.
I'm just going to take a couple of moments in case some of your many followers, I know you recommended this book to your followers, and if they weren't familiar with it, I'll give them the big idea in case it comes up in our conversation, so we'll all be speaking in the same language. So it'll just be a couple of minutes, and then I'm going to start asking you questions. So if you haven't read the book, if you had to sum it up as quickly and efficiently as possible, there's this idea out there called the 80-20 rule, and it's about the idea that a minority of what you do, in this case 20%, will result in the majority of your results, in this case 80. It's just a number that showed up for an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto, and many achievers since have noticed that it's kind of a law of success, and we've definitely seen it in our work with businesses around the world, that the minority of what you do results in the majority of your efforts. And our goal with The One Thing was to give people a platform for identifying that minority and really taking it beyond 20% to what's the one thing that you can do at any given time to get the biggest results for whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Once people identify that, we believe the outcome, and in our experience, is what we call the domino effect. I imagine that everybody on this call at one time or another has lined up dominoes. It's that simple idea that if you line them up properly, right, you get them in the right order, one action will have multiple effects, right? You can knock over one domino and it starts a chain reaction. We actually ran into some research in the American Journal of Physics back in 1981 by a guy named Loren Whitehead, and he discovered that not only can you do a lot of stuff, right? I think the world record for dominoes is almost 4.5 million. So that's the scale on just the numbers. He discovered that a 2-inch domino can knock over a 3-inch domino. And a 3-inch domino can knock over a 4.5-inch domino. Basically, a domino can knock over one that's 50% bigger. And he created some wooden models, and he described it in his article that by the 9th one, it was larger than a door. And then what started with a gentle tick ended with a large slam. We asked our researchers to kind of model that out, like if you could build infinitely large dominoes and start your own geometric progression, you would get essentially, if you graphed it, a hockey stick graph. That's what scientists call this. What begins really apparently slow and small can magnify enormously by the end in ways that will surprise you. So if you literally started with a 2-inch domino and it was growing by 50% each time, by the 18th domino, the domino would be larger than the Leaning Tower of Pisa. By the 23rd, it would be way higher than the Eiffel Tower. By the 31st, the domino would be 3,000 feet above Mount Everest, the tallest point on Earth. And by the 57th, it would almost stretch the distance between the Earth and the Moon. It kind of boggles the mind. One of the central themes of the book is when you do the right thing, you can get this sort of geometric progression in your life. It's about doing the right thing day in and day out. You gain momentum and your results get magnified. This is what a powerful habit can look like in your health. And the inverse is also true. If you have bad habits in your life, it may appear that there's no consequences for a long time until something big happens. And that was a big takeaway I had in the research for the book. Kind of the final piece of the puzzle that I thought might really come up in our conversation today. We're big believers in habits. When you know the right thing, we want you to make it a habit. Because when you work for a habit, the habit starts working for you. Most of us had heard in my lifetime that it takes 21 days to form a habit. But the research didn't really back that up. When my co-author Gary Keller and we spent 5 years on this with our research team, we found some research from Australian researchers, and they basically asked, I think, 208 graduate students to take on a new health habit. It could be anything that they chose. And then they just followed them around for a year saying, did you do it, and how hard was it? What they were looking for is where that little red star is on your screen, the point where 95% of the effort went away. Right? In the beginning, it's really hard to get up at 5 a.m. to go to the gym, but over time, you start waking up before the alarm clock goes off. So they found that over the course of all those different habits, everything from quitting smoking to drinking 8 glasses of water a day, that it took on average 66 days to form a habit. So the point being, when you figure out your one thing, and in this conversation today, it's going to be about the next big thing you need to do for your health, at the very least, make a commitment to incorporating it into your lifestyle for 66 days, possibly longer, so that that can become a habit, something you don't have to think about or work as hard for. The only other point I'll make on this slide is, if you look at that line, notice that the discipline it requires to do the habit never goes to zero. If you can remember back to your 9th grade math class, they described something in geometry called an asymptote. And that is a line that gets smaller and smaller but never goes to zero. And the truth is, even for habits like brushing your teeth that should be ingrained for all time, there's still a minute amount of effort that's required of you to remember to actually brush your teeth before you hop in the car to go see your next client. It gets smaller and smaller, but it never goes away. And the truth is, when you break that rhythm, you may have to rebuild it. And I always equate this, if you go on a 2-week vacation and stop working out, it might be a little bit harder to get back into your rhythm when you come back. So maintenance of your habits is a very important concept, and that's why it sometimes is hard to restart them. So kind of the final slide before we talk to our expert, we asked this question, the focusing question, which is at the heart of our book. What's the one thing I can do such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or necessary? We're trying to find that domino run in the different areas of our life. We did some research in all the different areas, and it's stuff that doesn't actually end up in the finished book, but which we've shared in some of our speeches. We actually asked our researchers to say, what are the first 3 dominoes on a broad level for health? And I thought it was very curious that we came up with, first it was sleep, then it was nutrition and diet, and then it was exercise. That actually sleep is an amazing platform foundation for the last 2. Right? If you don't get enough sleep, you tend to overeat. You know, the enzymes in your body that say I'm full get kind of left asleep, and the ones that say I'm hungry get turned on a little bit more. And so you tend to overeat a little bit when you're chronically not getting enough rest. And it also, the work that you do in your body doesn't have as much impact. There are multiple reasons that if you don't get enough sleep, that might be your first domino. And then nutrition, which is again a platform for the muscles that you might want to build. But I thought I wanted to raise that point because Charles, before I got on this call, shared a very lengthy article that he did for the Huffington Post, and he hit on many of these same threads. So without further ado, hopefully you've got kind of a sense of what the one thing was. I'd like to bring Charles back into the conversation. And, you know, just to kind of kick things off, Charles, would you mind just sharing in your own words how you got into strength training, just so people have a sense of, I mean, how long you've been at this game and your depth of experience?
Well, thank you, Jay. Well, I started strength training when I was 14. I was already a black belt in karate, and then I was always very disciplined as a kid. And they announced a big snowstorm, so I got up an hour and a half earlier. I knew the buses weren't running, so I walked to the dojo, and by the time I showed up, I was the only kid who showed up. So my sensei said, well, I've got to train. I'm going to lift some weights. Once I'm done lifting weights, I'll give you a ride home because there's no buses. I said, well, can I lift? And he goes, sure. And then that's when I got bit by the iron bug. I loved it. But you got to realize, in 1975, if you lifted weights, you were a weirdo. You're part of the subculture. But fortunately enough, my sensei was a big fan of Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee, way back then, advocated strength training for increased punching and kicking power. So I was very fortunate to start way before it became popular. And
that's
then
cool.
17.
The name Sensei actually does stem from your background that goes all the way back to that dojo where your sensei to give you your first weight training class. That's pretty cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's basically, so that's why when I created my business, my sensei wrote to me, and he was very proud of the fact that I used that name for the business.
Oh, that's great. Well, we got to meet because you shared the book on your Facebook page, which is, you're wanting to know, it's facebook.com/strengthsensei. And my trainer, I have a trainer that my wife and I work out with 3 mornings a week, Chris Bradsher, there's a shout out to him if he's on this call. He just said, man, this is a really big deal. This guy is a big figure in our world. I know a lot of trainers that look up to him, and if he's promoting your book, it's a big deal. And that's kind of how I ended up reaching out to you. What I didn't ask you then, but I'd love to ask you now, what was it in particular? Was there something in the book that really struck a chord with you that made you want to share it with your audience?
Actually, throughout the years, in order to reach success that I've had, I had to change my view. But when I read the book, I said, does this guy live in my closet? Because a lot of the same mistakes that I made were made by the both of you. So we had read the same books, followed the same leaders, and then I said, this guy must be successful. One of the problems you have with a lot of, quote, success writers is they're not that successful. It's like a virgin sex therapist. So I Googled Gary Keller, and I go, wow, this guy, has made millions of the real estate. So it's then, in my opinion, the information had more value. But what struck a chord is that with the one thing, I mean, I've always applied that principle in training. So because in reality, all the Olympic athletes I've coached, on average, I've only had 11 weeks a year to get them in shape as far as strength is concerned. So in other words, I can't mess around with time fillers. Every single minute has to have a return on investment. So the philosophies were very similar, but what struck a chord is that if you do the one thing, you don't have to work that much. So after reading the one thing, I'll go on holidays a lot more. I'll probably double and a half my income, and I work a lot less and I have more fun. So that's why I recommend the books to all my students. I tell them, you're making a big mistake if you don't read the book. I think the book for anybody, doesn't matter if you sell cars, real estate, you're a nurse, a surgeon, doesn't really matter. The book has so many useful lessons that it's a must read. I think if I was U.S. president, it'd be a mandatory reading when you're 12. You need to be about 12 years old to understand the concepts, but after that, I think it's a great book.
Thank you for saying that, and I love that you said we must have been reading the same books, because it's true. Gary had backed into a lot of these ideas through making lots of, like you said, mistakes, and it was through his research. A lot of the ideas, we're not claiming they're actually new, but we tried to put them together in a way that people could actually follow and implement them. So I'm glad it passed muster with someone like you who's actually lived it on a really high level. I had no idea that you only had about 11 weeks of access to these elite athletes to make a big impact. That seems like a pretty small window. So no wonder you had to ask the question, what is the most highest ROI activities we can do together to make this work for them and for you?
Exactly.
Well, one of the things that I thought was interesting, which is why I had that slide about for what we found were the first three dominoes were sleep, then nutrition, then exercise. And a lot of people jump right to the last one. And when I was reading your article, the interview for the Huffington Post, and I believe that was on executive health, I was like, wow, he's also hitting on strength right off the bat, sleep right off the bat. There's a lot of entrepreneurs on this call. That's a lot of our audience is business people and self-employed people. And I would imagine that among the trainers, the professional trainers that follow you, it's the same thing. How do we get highly motivated, highly energetic people to actually slow down and sleep? Do you have a teaching technique, a coaching technique that you can share with us for our lives and for the people around us?
Well, to quote Stephen Covey, no one on their deathbed will say, I should have spent more time at the office. So, I tell that to students. But in reality, when I work with a pro team, let's say in the British Premiership in football, what we call soccer in America, the first lecture I give the players is how to sleep better. The reason being is that if you don't use that as your first domino, you're wasting your time. And then I lecture on why basically I sell them on what sleep does for them. And then, people say things like, oh, you have plenty of time to sleep at the cemetery. Well, allow me to disagree. The thing is that with quality sleep, everything in your body changes. And one of the things is what we call the Anabolic Cascade. In other words, the ability to repair your tissue. Now, if you look at the average executive athlete that we see in the personal training world, they all have orthopedic problems. Torn cartilages, torn ACLs, blah, blah, blah. And then one of the reasons why people get so many orthopedic injuries as they age is that they don't allow time for regeneration of the tissue. And your primary rebuilding opportunity or tool in your own body is actually sleep. So if you don't sleep properly, you can't repair properly. But all the hormones that control body composition are sleep related. So if you go to any country around the world and you plot a curve of how many obese people there are or how many overweight people, the curve is the same shape as sleep disturbances. So for example, 72.6% of Americans don't sleep well, and we have 72.6% of fat people, right? You go to Belgium, only 10% of people complain of sleep disorders, but only 10% of the Belgian population has a weight problem. So those two curves match each other. And then if you look at the reasons why it makes you fat, it's not one. It's a normal cascade. And if you don't sleep properly and you don't sleep deeply, you're not going to accomplish much at work. So, it's like trying to cut down trees with an axe that's dull. So, okay, you may hit the tree for 16 hours a day, but with a dull axe. You go to bed, you sharpen the axe, so you only need to work 4 hours because your blade is sharp. So that's why it's so important to sleep well. So I give the dull axe analogy when I explain it to people. So when you sleep well, you sharpen the axe.
I love that, and I love the idea of the executive athlete too, just because business people, have to perform on many levels. We actually found a study that I thought was kind of fascinating because I went down this rabbit hole for a while. People who don't get enough sleep actually chronically set lower goals than they could possibly achieve, and that's been reproduced twice now. And so, not only are you lowering your performance, but you're lowering your aim, which I thought could be kind of tragic, especially when you think about kids start getting sleep deprived in America pretty early on. So I know that there's no magic number because there might be a wide range of ages. I've heard between 7 and 8 hours. When you coach those athletes in the Premier League, how do you tell them to get a good night's sleep? Is there some wisdom that we could hear really quickly besides it sounds, you made a great case for we need it. Are there any, one thing we could do to be better at getting our sleep?
The one thing which I find improves people's sleep the most, for example, I was talking to a former gold medalist for the U.S., and he was complaining of a sleep disorder. He was having dinner at my house, and I told him, do you sleep with your phone to wake you up? He goes, yes, of course. I said, okay, turn it off and put it at least 4 meters away from your brain. I said, turn off your Wi-Fi in your house. And he goes, are you kidding me? I said, yeah, because you do get radiation from a cell phone, and just buy a cheap Casio watch to wake you up in the morning, or some battery-operated clock, and the Wi-Fi doesn't need to be on. He looked kind of puzzled, and his girlfriend says, I'm going to try it. So he tried it, and the first thing I got when I woke up that morning was a text from me. He goes, oh my God, it's the first time I've slept through the night in years. So I always tell athletes, and a lot of athletes have 2 phones on top of that. So basically they're microwaving their brains while they're sleeping. There's a lot of evidence from Europe on how bad cell phones are from your brain. Anyway, the Canadian government's not too happy with what cell phones does to Canadians' brains. So there's more and more scientific evidence to show that the radiation is bad for you. So that if there's one thing that I always check out as when I give a class, I make the students raise their hand. I ask them, how many of you use their smartphones to wake up? And about 99% of people raise their hand. So how many people sleep with the Wi-Fi on? 100% of people raise their hand. So I say, okay, this is your homework today. Just turn off your Wi-Fi when you go to bed, and turn off your phone and put it at least 4 meters away from your head. Then the next day, I ask the students, so how was your sleep? And everybody's like amazed how great they slept just because of that. And it's actually a very good medical doctor in functional medicine that says that one of the main causes of autism in children could be cell phone use by the mother while she's pregnant, and actually Wi-Fi presence in the house. And then, because when both you and I were children, which was a long time ago, there was no autistic children, but there was also no Wi-Fi and no cell phones. So it's not the only cause to autism, but it's called a factor within the equation. Okay, so they found, for example, women who work in real estate or work in the stock market tend to use more cell phones. They're more likely to have children with autism. So it's important that people, what I call, diminish their electronic pollution. And that's one of the key instruments of better sleep.
Well, I'll concur with you. And our coaching during the daytime, we coach people when you're doing your one thing, to find a bunker, a protected place, and sweep for mind so that you don't have any distractions in your environment. And the first place I teach people to go is to turn off their phone. Correct. If they're not actively using it for work, turn it off, because I've got many friends, and I know that they do this. They sleep with their phone by their bed, but it's more than just their alarm clock. They're texting and receiving texts and waking up in the middle of the night. And I did read one social media study that the first thing, like a huge percentage of people do when they wake up, is they check Facebook. So it also, they're kind of multitasking when they should be sleeping, right? They're allowing that distraction in a very literal sense, beyond the radiation, to kind of keep them from giving their full attention to just relaxing and restoring.
Correct. I mean, the ability to focus, there's quite a few studies that will show that if you turn off all that stuff, an hour and a half complete focus equals 4 hours with distractions, So, turn off your email when you're writing a text. Like, one thing I've learned is from Tim Ferriss is actually the concept of batching. So, when you phone, when you email, but the rest of the time, my own daughter, she's not allowed to be online or have a phone when she's doing homework, unless she needs to be online for the homework, like, let's say a math website. But the point is that when you eliminate all distraction, it takes a lot less time to do things. It drives me bonkers when I'm at the gym and people are checking their Facebook page. Legally, I should be allowed to roundhouse kick them in the throat with a pair of steel-toe boots. It should be in their gym contract. Because another thing, I don't want the radiation while I'm training. So,
they're seeing how many likes they got on the selfie they did of themselves in the mirror with their triceps flexed, right? So.
That's right. That's right. Gym should be a selfie-free zone.
Okay, I'm going to quote you on that.
Yeah.
Well, if we knock down that domino, I was blessed. One thing, and now I'm recurring, I'm probably the last person I know to even own a cell phone, being kind of an introverted writer. But I've always been one, when my head hits the pillow, it drives my wife crazy. I'm out like a light. If you had the sleep thing just knocked out, what's next? Nutrition? What would be the next domino for you?
The next nutrition is actually, this is one of my maxims. The first thing you put in your mouth in the morning, provided it's food, will dictate all your neurotransmitters for the day. And this is not a new concept. In Israel and in Sweden, they've done studies on breakfast makeup, and, for example, the number of chairs and tables a furniture factory would do. And interestingly enough, now this is the 50s, those two researchers, group of researchers, did not talk to each other to design their study, but actually the studies were very similar, and the outcome was, of course, very similar. And what they did is that they changed the macronutrient ratio at breakfast. So the percentage of protein was the main factor they looked at. And since then, Harvard and a few universities in Toronto have looked at this concept of what do you eat first in the morning, and how does that affect your performance throughout the day. And the rule of thumb is that the higher the protein content in percentage in the meal, the greater people produce work not only before lunch, but also after lunch. In other words, it impacts on your food selection. You're less likely to pick junk food or empty calories if you eat breakfast properly than if you have a high carbohydrate breakfast. There's very good studies out of Harvard that IQ tests are biased by the amount of fast carbohydrates you have for breakfast. So, kids, a lot of American kids go to school. What do they have for breakfast? A glass of orange juice and, Eggo waffles with what I call telephone pole syrup, because it's not even real maple syrup. Right?
Yes.
So the Aunt Jemima syrup, and they go to school. Well, Harvard showed that decreases your IQ by about 20%. So, and it doesn't matter if you're in grade school or if you're selling real estate. If you eat, let's say, one of those toasted waffles or whatever for breakfast, yeah, you may have a quick burst of energy, but you're going to pay off the piper later. It's false energy. So the more protein content you have, that's why I'm a big advocate of the meats and nuts breakfast, which is my most popular article on the net. It's been translated in 27 languages. A lot of people plagiarize it, which is a sign it's worthy information. They put their name on it. I see that every day. But the meat and nut breakfast, when people read it and start applying, I get emails on a daily basis when people, this has changed my life. So the rationale between the meat and nut breakfast is that it's going to raise what we call the yang neurotransmitters, the neurotransmitters that give you drive and attention. So that is dopamine and acetylcholine. So if you eat, let's say, a steak and some pecans for breakfast, you will see your ability to focus, to make decisions, to do mental math, all that goes up. I advocated that since '82, but the research in the literature only came out about 6 years ago to back me up as far as that precise content of food. So I think it's very important that people fix their breakfast first. And then, once you fix your breakfast, then you work, it increases your willpower, for lack of a better word, for the other meals. But the most important meal to fix first is the breakfast. And when people are reticent about it, I make them do this experiment. Saturday, eat a meat and nuts breakfast. So when you wake up, you assess your brain on a scale 1 to 10. Let's say it's a 6. Eat the meat and nuts breakfast at, let's say, 8. 9 o'clock, how's your brain? The guy says it's a 10. The next day I said start with the opposite. So start with orange juice, pancakes, telephone pole syrup, blah, blah, blah. And then an hour later, assess your brain. It'll be like -14. So I find that experimentally, when people do the two experiments, they become quite convinced of what one does and what the other, how negative it is.
I love that. You use the word willpower there, and we have a chapter on that in the One Thing, and it's about your nutrition has a direct impact on your ability to focus as well.
Correct.
And when I give this speech, I gave it yesterday at the Teachers Retirement System of Texas. It's like one of the 5th largest pension funds in the world. And I just said a lot of you, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, probably started your day with just a cup of coffee. And you say things like, I'm not a breakfast person. And then I show them some of the charts in the book about how that creates an attention deficit for them throughout the day. That their ability to focus is going to be severely compromised because they don't actually have the nutrition in their bloodstream to feed one of the most hungry organs in your body, and it's called your brain. Right. You 1/5 of all the energy you provide, and it's a 1/50th of your body mass. So it's kind of a Hummer in terms of mileage. So you gotta wake up and feed it. And I always go straight to the protein breakfast or the rich complex carbohydrates. Like, and my daughter, she's a wonderful little paleo. She would eat meat and pecans and an apple every single morning for her life and never complain. And if only I'd started that way.
Correct.
Well,
breakfast is, as they say, is the most important meal of the day.
absolutely. I know that you've written extensively about supplements, and I'm going to just raise my hand, and I am absolutely ignorant. For the absolute novice who works out and is interested in health and high function, do you have kind of a short version on how supplements can impact this nutrition equation?
Yes, the most important supplement, and there's tons of research to back this up, is actually omega-3s. Most people don't consume enough omega-3s. I mean, the human genome evolved on 300 to 400 grams of omega-3 a week. Most Americans are lucky if they get 3 grams a week. So if you look at how the brain evolved worldwide, the earlier and the larger the omega-3 intake was in the Paleolithic man, the faster his brain developed. And for example, one way you look at that is who had tools the earliest, and then they usually had high omega-3 intake. So the thing is that there's a receptor site in every cell in the human body for omega-3, which explains that if you go on a online database like PubMed, which has all the medical literature on it, it is impossible to not search under omega-3 and any disease known to man. It's impossible not to find a study, at least one, that shows that omega-3 helps in the treatment of this disease. So whether it's preeclampsia, whether it's ADD, whether it's Down syndrome, whatever, it doesn't matter. High blood pressure, and if you search in a medical search engine omega-3 and you put as a second search word any disease known to man, you will find at least one study that shows that omega-3 helps with that. So you have to get a good source of omega-3s. How much? It depends how good your diet is. Usually, if the person is obese, I may go as much as 45 grams a day, which was earlier criticized by colleagues, but now Canadian research shows that it's even safe to take 60 grams of omega-3s a day if you are overweight. After 6 months, you can dramatically lower your dosage, where you may only take 2 to 6 grams a day. But the average listener here, if they start taking omega-3 supplements, they'll lose body fat, put on muscle, their brain function goes up, inflammation goes down. I mean, I've written articles where there's at least 16 great reasons why you need to put omega-3s as a supplement to increase brain function. But of course, if your diet is all wild meat and you only eat elk and scallops and you have a great diet, you won't need it. But I don't know too many people who hunted for deer this morning to have breakfast, right? So
that's right.
So this is the number one supplement. Number two, I would say for the executive crowd, is actually curcumin. Curcumin, actually, people think it's an antioxidant, but it's not really an antioxidant. It's an antioxidant pathways stimulator. So it repairs everything basically in the human body. There's a very good doctor out of Boulder, Colorado, Robert Roundtree, who lectured on it last year, and there's at least 76 reasons why you should supplement with curcumin. So that's my number two. Number three,
that's spelled C-U-R?
C-U-R-C-U-M-I-N.
Okay, cool. That way people can Google for it after our talk.
Correct. But the best source of curcumin is an Italian form called Meriva. So if you want to Google for curcumin, make sure they look for Meriva curcumin, M-E-R-I-V-A. The third most important supplement for people, in my opinion, and I've got lots of clinical evidence on that, is actually magnesium. And if you exercise a lot, you deplete your magnesium more. If you're insulin resistant, you need more magnesium. And the dosage I recommend are very high, but they work and they get results fast. I recommend that men should take about 4 grams a day and women 2.4 grams a day. Interesting enough, I get executives, for example, who never were able to change their bad lipid profile, and they're going for medical insurance. They can't improve their scores, and they get turned down. I put them on 4 grams of magnesium, and within 3 weeks, their lipid panel has changed completely, especially when combined with fish oil and curcumin. So that's the top 3 supplements anybody interested in mental and physical performance should use.
I love that. One of the things that Gary often says, we'll break to have lunch, and we usually get, there's a couple of providers that do really healthy, recently made foods. There's one called My Fit Foods here in town, another one, Snap Kitchen, and we'll compare the ingredients to whatever. But he's a big proponent that food is medicine. And
Correct.
I think when you stray into the supplement talk, it becomes really clear that what you put in your mouth is more than just fuel. It's also medicine for your body. It's very important.
Correct. I mean, nothing will ever replace diet. Okay, supplement. The word says it. It's supplements. You know, it's not replacement. It's supplement. So the more you eat for where our genes were designed, then the better you'll do. You know, there were no donut trees. There's no such thing as a soda river. So, you know,
Are you kind of a proponent for the, in broad terms, what people call the Paleo Diet? I mean, just that sense of nuts, fruits, meats, you know, stuff that has been around for a long, long time versus a lot of the processed stuff?
correct. I'm more. I have a little addition to it. I prefer what we call an ancestral diet. Okay. In other words, I'm not. It depends on your genotype. So, for example, if you're, or let's say, a Cheyenne native, well, dairy product was not part of your diet, right? So that you should stay away. But let's say if you're from Denmark or Sweden, your ancestors used dairy a long time ago, and those people, if you do food intolerance tests, have no problem with dairy. But things like Pop-Tarts, I'm not so keen. You know, usually if it comes packaged, you don't need that. But the worst offender for most people is actually grains. So
Right.
I'd rather say a grainless diet. A true paleo diet, people, that's what I call an American phenomenon, tend to polarize and go to the extremes, right? And then, I mean, even if you look at people who actually follow a so-called paleo diet, right, when you do their metabolic profiles, they're actually always more deficient than a guy that eats a crappy diet in CoQ10 and probiotics. And you say, well, if they eat so well, why would they become more deficient? Well, you know, the true paleo diet, you pick your carrot from the soil, you don't wash it and eat it. Well, people wash their carrots. So a lot of the probiotics and prebiotics that are in the ground are washed off, right? So when you have a really high protein diet, you actually lower the levels of probiotics in your body. And CoQ10, I always ask questions to my students, how many of you hunted your deer this morning that you ate? You know, and of course no one does. I've only had one woman from Saskatchewan raised her hand and she did it, but that's really rare. Right? If you live in New York, you're not going to go hunt for deer in Central Park. So, and then when I heard that, I was like, I don't really believe it. So I went back and looked at all the blood work of my athletes, and truly enough, the guys who were strictest on the diet had the lowest levels of CoQ10. So, and the reason is that exercise can boost CoQ10, but high meat diet without exercise lowers CoQ10. So I found that, you know, so one of my colleagues calls most people who follow paleo diet a metro paleo diet. It's not really paleo. So I think people, you know, anytime you go to extremes, you're going to get into trouble. So that's why I prefer what I call an ancestral diet. For example, whey protein, you know, you could argue that it is not paleo, true, but I wouldn't throw it away either as a protein source, or goat protein and so on. So that's why I prefer to use ancestral diet as a term.
Is there a test we can go to our doctor and kind of get a sense of, I mean, other than knowing my dad was Scottish and my mom was, you know, whatever, I mean, is there a way to test kind of a sense of where that ancestral diet might lie for us?
The best test, and the thing, you know, I'm not paid by them, but I endorse it because it's really true, is done by Cyrex Labs, C-Y-R-E-X. And the big advantage, they test you for food intolerances. Their biggest advantage compared to any other company in the world is that they tell you where that food intolerance affects you. So, for example, you may be intolerant to soy, and it affects your thyroid, and I may be intolerant to soy, but it affects my brain or my joints. So then, clinically, people go, oh, yeah, look, every time I eat whatever, I can feel it in my elbows, or I feel depressed, or whatever that food does to you. And but you can only get it through a medical doctor. But I'll repeat, CYREX, and they offer full panels. They can even tell you if you have leaky gut syndrome. But now they have a new test on how the food actually affects your brain. And for anybody that's into performance, like I'm sure there's a lot of real estate salespeople here, and the more your brain functions, the better you'll do at sales. Well, I would strongly recommend anybody listening to this seminar or webinar to get the CYREX lab test.
How much does that cost, do you know? Or is it your insurance won't cover it?
It depends what type of insurance you have, but typically they don't. But it's one of these things, the return on the investment for your health and mental performance is so high that it's about $2,000 if you do the full Monty.
Okay.
I think that, every single one of my clients who went for it said it saved basically their lives. I get all my executives to do it, and my athletes, because they see right away what it does to them. And sometimes they may eat something that is healthy, but it's terrible for them. So, for example, quinoa is a very healthy food, but for me it is like poison. So there's a lot of nice discoveries you get from that. I'm allergic intolerant also to flax. Flaxseed oil is great, flax seeds are great, but for me it's a poison. So once you eliminate those foods in your diet, you find like joint pain goes down, brain function goes up, gut health goes up. So it's a great investment.
Maybe one person on this call will forego getting the big screen TV for Christmas and get this panel done, and we can raise our hands in victory.
That's right, but the advantage is next year that I've made so much more money that they can give everybody in the audience a free giant screen TV. So
there we go.
You gotta go like that.
Well, we're getting towards the 45-minute mark, and if you can go a little longer. I mean, we've done the dominoes on sleep and nutrition. Talk to us a little bit about strength training. I know that there are some professional trainers on here. I have some friends from Five Fitness and Camp Gladiator, two big gyms here in town that I know are on the call. They wanted to know. They were asking me, what about what kind of period do you use between strength training and endurance training, and what's frequency? Kind of when someone's in strength training, what are kind of the top three things that you would want to know that they were doing so that they were doing it right?
Well, first of all, there's very strong research that if you go from 3 to 4 workouts a week, that extra workout is 50% more results. So I believe that people should train 4 days a week. That's number one. Number two, they should avoid cardio, especially if they're interested in brain and heart health. If you look at the top 2 functional medicine practitioners in the U.S., one of them is Bijan Porat out of Beverly Hills. He's a top cardiologist. He's anti-cardiovascular training, and this is a cardiologist. He's worth listening to. He'll give you all the medical reasons why you should, but he calls cardio training junk training. And then, and there's Dr. Schwarzbein, who's a top endocrinologist out of Santa Barbara. She treats mainly diabetics, and she's utterly convinced that cardio increases insulin resistance. And by the same token, diminishes brain function. So I'm anti-cardio. I'm talking steady-state cardio. I'm not talking about there's many forms of endurance work, like interval training, strongman training. I'm all for that. But what I don't like is people sitting on an electronic bike and then pedal for an hour while reading Time magazine or going on Facebook or whatever they do. Because there's a Magda Alice she's a doctor out of Guelph, Ontario. She's shown that if you bike or do a treadmill, you increase insulin resistance by about 36% if you're using electronic equipment. So if you're going to bike, go on the road, or take a pair of cross-country skis, go on the snow, or whatever you do, go outside, but don't do it on electronic equipment. So there's very good research. Go ahead.
I was going to ask for a clarification, because the distinction between cardio, and I think you hit it, but I know a lot of folks that are in my fitness world do resistance training and the kind of stuff that like you might find in a CrossFit gym, that style where you're mixing it up all the time, lots of resistance. That's kind of more endurance resistance training. Is that considered cardio? Because I know there's an element of it, but it's not, right?
No, in my world, if there's enough load and you can't do it more than 1 minute before you need a rest, that's fine. Okay, so in other words, if you're doing power cleans for half a minute, then you're doing jumps on a box, and then this, and that, 4 exercises in a row, then you take a rest. Because you vary your muscles and you go at a high velocity, that is not steady state cardio. I love that. I encourage people to do it. What I don't like is people sitting on a bike or going on a treadmill, 20 minutes, same speed, same heart rate, blah, 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 okay? If you want to get fat and be dumber, go right ahead. That's the best way you could do it, okay?
Tell us how you feel about that. That's great.
Yeah, I know I'm holding back, but yes.
Well, big aha for me is, right now my wife and I have 3 workouts a week. And it sounds like we need to go to 4.
You will be amazed what an extra workout will do to your physique. You're losing body fat, putting muscle mass on, and also brain function. Actually, there's very good research on the type of exercise and brain rejuvenation coming out of Belgium. And I listened to the guy 3 years ago in Norway at the International Strength Symposium, and the guy showed that strength training regenerates brains, and cardio, steady state work, ages the brain. And it has to do with neural growth factors actually made by the brain. So strength training tends to regenerate neurons. So that's why I prefer interval training, CrossFit training, strength training to not only for my Olympic athletes, but also for my executives, I mean, if you're going to put time in the gym 4 hours a week, in my opinion, most people, if they do 4 hours a week with the right work, that's all they need. Okay. If you're training longer than an hour, you're making friends. You're not training.
Well, I've got one last question, and I know that we're getting to the end of our time. We've got at least 6 or 7 questions from folks that are dying to get their questions answered in our audience. Can I just ask you a question? I usually advocate, and you can coach me, and I tell people, if you have the ability to choose, work out in the morning because you have more control of your time and you're more likely to actually work out. But I've heard some people push back lately, and they say that it's actually more beneficial to work out in the afternoon. I'll put the question to the true expert. Do you have a strong opinion either way?
Well, actually, the best research on that comes out of Slovakia. There's people who make their androgens early in the morning, and there's people who make the androgens around 5 o'clock. So instinctively, if you find it works better for you at 9, train at 9. If you find you have the most energy at 5, train at 5. They did a very good study where they measured when did people make the androgens. That's their male hormones throughout the day. So some people make it early. They're the ones who wake up under a TP in the morning, right? So those guys have high testosterone in the morning. Some people, their sex drive goes up around 5. So they said, okay, we'll divide you in 4 groups. So 2 groups train at their optimal androgen time, and 2 groups train at the reverse. So some guys that were 5 o'clock testosterone guys train at 9 and vice versa. And surprise, surprise, people have the best results when they train at their what they call native androgen time. So for example, for myself, I have much better results training in the morning because that's when I make my androgens. But the guy next door could be a guy that makes his androgens at 5, and he should train at 5. So the optimal time is what's best for you.
Charles, do you have a couple more minutes so we can answer a few of the questions from our audience?
Of course.
All right, I'm going to let Ian. He's got them. He's able to read them. So Ian is going to join us. He's my partner in crime here, and he'll read off a few of the questions here for you.
Okay.
Right. Thanks, Charles. That was very insightful, and we're going a little longer, but we want to get to some of the questions here. I think there's some very interesting ones. So the first one from Willie. If you were just starting out as an aspiring strength coach today, what would be the one thing you would do?
Success leaves clues. That's the number one thing. So you should study under people who have results. The problem with the internet, everybody claims to be an expert. I would look at somebody who has had Olympic success. If you can make somebody the strongest person in the world that day or set a world record, you obviously, especially world records, in my opinion, are more important than Olympic medals. Because if you do a world record, you're doing something that no one has ever done. So that's the type of guys I would seek their advice. The problem with the internet is everybody's an expert. And of course on Facebook you have proof of that. People will debate you on on social media. The number one thing is to study under successful coaches, and there's a lot of them, and it's fairly easy to Google. And for example, Ben Prentice in Connecticut has trained, over 60 top-level hockey players. So if hockey interests you, you go there. If you want to learn about basketball, you would study under Al Vermeil. You want to study college sports, you study under Preston Green out of Florida, Florida Gators. So there's a lot of experts out there, but study with someone who's successful.
Thank you. There's one here regarding sleep that I thought it was interesting. The question is there a right amount of sleep? I think the question was asked, but could you give your insight into that? And then there was also another question that asked if naps are helpful, and if so, is there a right length for naps?
Okay, question number one. How much should you sleep? You got to distinguish. I mean, there's such a thing as uniqueness in physiology. The same way, everybody's got different fingerprints. So the values will be anywhere between 6 to 10 hours. But there's 2 points that are very clear from sleep researchers that everybody agrees on. So let's say if I put 2,000 sleep researchers into a stadium, okay? And then I said, you guys can only get out of the stadium once you agree on 2 things, okay? They would get out of the stadium because they would agreed on everybody has to wake up at the same time. So when some days you wake up at 6, sometimes you wake up at 10, that's the worst sleep habit you can have. So you pick a time you need to wake up, whether it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, you wake up at the same time. That's number one. Everybody agrees on that. Number 2, sleep that occurs before midnight is actually more restorative than any other sleep. In other words, if you sleep 8 hours but you go to bed at 2, you don't get the same repair and brain function improvement if you go to bed at 10 p.m. Okay, so these, in French we call it a grandma's tale, but it's actually now backed up by German research. Sleep before midnight is more restorative than sleep after midnight. And waking up at the same time every day is a second factor everybody would agree on.
I love that. I'd read about the waking up every day, and I moved my schedule to that. And, if I was still sleep deprived on a Saturday because I had a long night and still got up at my time, I always entitled myself to a nap. So I love hearing that validation for you. Could you answer the nap part of the question as well, since I just told you how I deal with waking up early on a Saturday when I need more sleep?
Here's an axiom I really like. The general who wins the war is the general who can sleep, okay? And Alexander the Great and Napoleon were known to have naps before battle. The guys they beat would be too anxious to fall asleep before the battle. So napping, in my opinion, is one of the greatest health habits you could have. Okay, Winston Churchill was a napper. You find a lot of great leaders all took naps, and I'm a big believer in napping. The optimal time for napping is between 20 minutes to 1 hour, according to research. And from experience, I would say it's true.
Cool.
Thanks, Charles. A couple more questions that I'm going to ask you here. I thought this was very interesting. What are your thoughts of CrossFit? I know it's very popular here in Austin, where Jay and I are based, and what are your thoughts on that?
Here's my points regarding CrossFit. CrossFit has the best intentions, in my opinion, in the exercise world, okay? So usually any CrossFit box you go around the world, people work hard. So that's the number one advantage of CrossFit. The disadvantage of CrossFit is that it's fairly easy to get a CrossFit box and call yourself a CrossFit thing, but where I think that industry lacks is standardization of training methods. So I see people exercising a CrossFit box. It looks like a penguin having an epileptic fit. Okay, it's terrible technique. I mean, sometimes I think those CrossFit boxes are owned by chiropractors so they can have more business. So the CrossFit is a great concept. The problem that I see is that the quality changes dramatically from boxes. as a rule of thumb, the Scandinavian ones are better run. So if I go to one, say, in Copenhagen, I will find that people are doing smarter things. The farther you are away from Scandinavia, the worse it gets.
It sounds like the quality of the trainers determines the quality of the box.
Correct. But the CrossFit as a concept, I like it. I've written articles on it and people misinterpreted what I said. One of the problems with the bad CrossFit boxes, there's an Hungarian proverb for that. If you only got one ass, you can't sit on two horses. So in some CrossFit boxes, they try to do too many things and they accomplish nothing. Okay?
We wrote a book about that. I like that.
It's called The One Thing. But
yeah.
if you apply the one thing to CrossFit, you can take all the principles of the book, The One Thing, apply that to CrossFit, you'll be a billionaire. Because it's in most boxes, it's like ADD exercise.
All right, I think we have time for one more. Ian, I think he selected a good one here.
Yeah, Kathy asks, what about yoga? Is that beneficial for weight loss? Do you have any thoughts on yoga, Charles?
Yoga is a great, what I call yin exercise. Okay, most people are too yang. You know, they're overdriven, they don't sleep, blah, blah, blah. Yoga, again, it's based on the quality of the instructor, makes a huge difference. I think it's a great addition to any exercise plan, especially if you're very stressed out. If you're as flexible as a crowbar, you probably want to give yoga a try. What I like about yoga, the problem with flexibility training, it's very boring. And yoga is always done in the group, 99% of the time. So it encourages people who have very poor joint flexibility and muscle flexibility to be able to get the benefits of group training. I think it's an adjunct, but it's not a replacement.
That's great. Thanks, Charles. At this point, we're gonna stop with the Q&A. We're gonna try to give information to the people in a little bit on how they can still get some of their questions answered. I'm gonna now pass it on to Jay to say some final words.
Well, first off, thanks for the education. I took about 2.5 pages of notes while I was trying to do my one thing, which is listen and ask good questions. So thanks for the education. It's clear why you have such a huge following. Do you have anything other than, I'm going to tell everybody, go visit your site, Strengths on Site. There's tons of great information. Anything else we need to share with the folks today before we wrap this up, Charles?
Well, the thing is that what's new now is that, for years I've taught strength trainers and athletes and special forces how to train, but now I have a huge demand in the executive market. So some of the listeners may be interested in having a seminar, let's say for their bank, their real estate job. And I do those. I've been doing it for a few banks and wealth management people. I go give seminars on how to improve brain and muscle function. It's only a day, and then you could ask if we have time for you at info@strengthsensei.com. And we give them those all over the world, and I teach how to be more efficient in a single day. So the return on investment is very high, and then if your brain functions better, it doesn't make you a bad person. If you sleep better, it makes you an even better person. So that's the
all right. So it sounds like they need to find out more. They need to email at info@strengthsonsite.com.
Exactly.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you again. I am super pleased with this recording, and I'm going to let now Ian wrap it up so that we can make sure that folks know what the next steps are if they want to get more out of this or share it with other folks.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Charles, again for your participation. It's been a great webinar. I know the attendance has been great and people are very excited. So for all the attendees, please, upon exiting, you're going to get a survey. We really appreciate if you would give us your feedback. It's very short. It won't take more than 1 minute, and it'll help us as we plan for our next webinars. Within 24 hours, you should get an email that will contain a link to this webinar, the recording. I know people have been asking about that, and if they want to share it, please go ahead and share that link. Also, if you want to take note of the URL right now there on the screen, that is actually our webinar archive. So it'll take a couple more days for us to upload this webinar there, but if you go now, you can actually see our previous 2 webinars, which are the One Thing for Your Personal Life and the One Thing for your business. So very interesting content there too. And today's webinar will be uploaded there within the next few days. Our next webinar will be scheduled in the month of February of next year, so please be on the lookout for that. In order to do that, you can follow us on Twitter. You can see our Twitter handles on the screen now at The One Thing Book for all the news and events related to The One Thing, and all our webinars are also promoted there. You can follow Jay at Jay Papasan. You can follow Charles, and I assume that Charles probably would not mind if you all tweet him some of the questions that were not answered at Strength Sensei. And then continue the conversation around this topic. You can use the hashtag The One Thing if you're an avid Twitter user. Again, our website is theonething.com, and Charles's is strengthsensei.com. The last thing is we want to offer you all a free guide that we developed here. It's a guide to organizing a successful wellness challenge, something that Keller Williams did using one of the concepts from The One Thing, which is a 66-day challenge. So please take note of that URL, theonething.com/wellness challenge. It's a free document for you all to go and download and share, and I think it has very interesting, insightful information if you want to organize a challenge for either your company, your team, or even for yourself. With this, we are ending our webinar. We want to thank you on behalf of Jay and Charles, and please follow us so you can get all our news and next webinars, and hopefully you all have a great new year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello? Hello?